Hello, everyone, and good morning. We're still in the morning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn series workshop. My name is Jasmine Julian. I'm the founder and CEO of Revitaled Reintegration Services. We are just about ready to get started. I know we see some people still trickling into the room, but that's okay. We're going to get started soon in the interest of time. Before jumping into the slides and today's workshop, we do want to take some time to acknowledge the land and space that we are on. And we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement and African ancestral acknowledgement. So as we come together in this online space, I want to begin by acknowledging that we are all joining from a part of the territory that forms Turtle Island. For me, I am situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, along with the enduring presence of other Indigenous peoples in this region. This recognition goes beyond a formality. It is a vital reminder of the rich histories, cultures, and contributions of Indigenous communities that have existed here for millennia. Reflecting on my personal journey, I realized that my understanding of the tragedies of residential schools and their profound impact on Indigenous peoples did not take shape until my time at university. As an undergraduate student at Toronto Metropolitan University, it was there that I was first exposed to the painful truths of colonization, including the loss of language, culture, and family ties experienced by so many Indigenous families, a truth that was long overdue for revelation. Learning about the intergenerational trauma that continues to affect these communities opened my eyes to the responsibilities we all share in promoting reconciliation. This awakening was both enlightening and deeply unsettling, compelling me to confront my roles in these narratives as a Canadian-born daughter of Caribbean immigrants. I would be amiss if I did not also pay tribute to those who helped to steward these lands, alongside those whose connections to the lands were severed. As a descendant of enslaved Africans who were forcibly displaced from their homeland, this personal connection informs my understanding of the pain, resilience, and strength that characterize the narratives of both Indigenous peoples and Black communities. While Indigenous peoples have long been the stewards of this land, people of African descent were brought here against their will during the transatlantic slave trade, and their labor was instrumental in building and sustaining this nation. As a Black-led, Black-serving, and Black-mandated organization, we acknowledge that Black communities continue to endure systemic challenges, including over-policing and over-incarceration, along with the lasting effects of intergenerational trauma. We must remember and honor their struggles and resilience as part of our collective journey towards justice and equality. As we engage in today's event, let us commit ourselves to understanding these interconnected histories and working collaboratively towards a future that recognizes, respects, and uplifts all marginalized voices. Together, we can contribute to a culture of learning and healing that honors our shared humanity and paves the way for true reconciliation. Thank you for joining me in this important reflection. Next slide, please. All right, so as previously mentioned, this workshop is part of a Lunch and Learn series hosted by Revitaled Reintegration Services. On the line, I have myself, founder and CEO of Revitaled, as well as Shevani, who will be leading today's session. But we want to give you a bit of information about Revitaled. Who are we? What do we do? This is where we're going to share some content about who we are. So as mentioned, we are a Black-owned nonprofit organization. We are based in Durham region, and we strive towards enhancing community safety and well-being outcomes. We are guided by an Afrocentric lens as our foundation for the work that we do, and use the 8 pillars of wellness as our blueprint for service delivery to accomplish our goal. We aim to be creative in all the work that we do, which you'll sort of catch on as we talk a little bit more about LawLantis later on in today's presentation. And we want to bring creativity and innovation to our service delivery, to think of new pathways to promote healing, stability, and legal literacy for our community. Some of our key lifetime achievements include touching over 18,000 lives through services, digital resources and programs we've delivered, launching 21 multimedia resources through our digital resource library, consulting nearly 20 community service agencies and institutions on human-centered and racially equitable care, and designing a program model blending creative arts, justice education, and Afrocentric principles, resulting in the creation of 2 iterations of a youth wellness advocacy comic book. Next slide, please. Right, so we're going to jump into a little bit of housekeeping items, just so we set the tone for today's conversation. We will be discussing sensitive topics during today's discussion, so it's critical that we approach these conversations with an open mind. Hate, harassment, harmful comments, these things will not be tolerated in this space. We believe that it is our shared responsibility to contribute to the creation of safer spaces. And part of how we can work towards that is through prioritizing being considerate of others' perspectives and histories. We will be using a youth-centered lens as part of today's discussion. Shevani will touch a bit more about what that is and how it will apply to our conversation, so I won't go into it in too much detail. But I do want to emphasize that the information that we will share today prioritizes the unique needs, rights, and perspectives of young people. We will also be touching on sensitive themes throughout today's workshop. So I'm sure we have a very professionally diverse group with us today. And in recognizing that fact, I'm pretty sure we're all aware that this can be heavy subject matter to navigate at times. So we do want to encourage you to take care of yourself if you find that this conversation can be a bit distressing at some point. The phone numbers for mental health and crisis lines are on the screen and will be added to the chat as well for reference. And this workshop is being recorded. It will also be shared with all of you, as well as posted on our social media platforms with attendees. And so we will just want to flag that for everyone's awareness, and also note that there will be some resources shared at a later date as well. Next slide, please. Right, so I'm going to hand it over to Shevani soon, but do want to give everyone a high-level overview of what we will be discussing today. So throughout this session, we will be covering topics including youth justice processes, including diversion and reintegration. We do want to make this a space where all can share and learn. So please feel free to add your comments to the chat. Please also feel free to add your questions as well. There will be a designated Q&A session later on in today's presentation, but we do want to encourage discussion, and there'll be some pinpointed moments for that as well. And at the end of today's workshop, we will also share a little bit more information about the LawLantis project overall. This LawLantis project consists of many pieces, including today's workshop. And so we do want to provide further context into why we are doing workshops like these, as well as the online youth justice literacy game that we created. Next slide, please. Right, and now I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Shevani Patel. Shevani is a dedicated youth justice professional and community advocate serving Scarborough. Shevani began as a practicum student with Revitaled, supporting the launch of youth advocacy program through the Your Story Matters project. As a graduate of Ontario Tech University with a BA in criminology and a minor in human rights law, she is deeply committed to supporting youth who are navigating complex legal and social systems. As a caseworker, Shevani works directly with youth in conflict with the law, providing holistic wraparound supports that address everything from court navigation and legal literacy to education, mental health, and community reintegration. She believes that every young person deserves access to justice, dignity, and opportunity. Driven by a passion for equity, Shevani works to bridge systemic gaps that impact marginalized youth, ensuring that they are not only supported, but empowered to advocate for themselves and their communities. Thank you so much, Shevani. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jasmine. Hello, thank you for being here. As Jasmine mentioned, my name is Shevani, and I'm the project assistant here with Revitaled. Today we're going to be talking about navigating the youth criminal justice system, more specifically talking about a youth-centered practice. So what I mean by that is talking about the disparities that there are within police interactions, reintegrations, and the importance of why we need to focus on youth when we're talking about the youth criminal justice system. Oftentimes, as professionals and individuals who work in the youth justice system or work with youth, we often provide our perspective and overlook the youth's perspective, not really recognizing what they've gone through as youth or what they're currently experiencing while navigating the system. So, in terms of that, that's why we're really going to be focusing on the 5 principles that are on why youth justice center practices matter, because oftentimes youth in the system today are seen as cases, right? So they are young people navigating a complex system that adults even face difficulties to understand. So as they do that, they continue to experience the personal and structural challenges in all aspects of their life, and we tend to overlook their fear, their mistrust, and as they're all expected to just understand and trust every single individual they encounter. So while they're all just as involved. So we know that their first interaction with us is often intimidating and confusing because their first interaction with the police or court results in their brains from shifting from survival mode to and amplifying their fear and reacting instead of reflecting on what's going on in front of them. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today, and just really focusing on the importance of youth-centered practices in our own work, and as well as understanding what the perspective of the youth criminal justice system is from a youth's perspective. In the chat, can someone say how do youth typically feel when interacting with the justice system? Or turn on your mics from your experience. Nervous, intimidated. Yeah, fear and often run away and flight. Exactly, their fight or flight responses kick in, and then they just do what is best for them at that current moment without really thinking it through. Anything else? Yeah, overwhelmed. Yeah, these emotions, fear, confusion, anxiety, overwhelmed, nervousness, are all create barriers for youth to comprehend or understand the criminal justice system. This, as a result, impacts the trust youth will have for professionals that work with them once they are in conflict with the law, which also creates barriers for long-term outcomes, such as receiving ongoing wraparound support. Okay. So we're going to start with talking about the youth justice statistics and the disparities that we see today, more specifically in Ontario. So as I said before, each part of what we discussed today will be focusing on a youth-centered approach. So we're going to start with talking about the racial and systemic disparities that are also part of this reality of the youth criminal justice system and what the Youth Criminal Justice Act is. So with that, the youth criminal justice system focuses on rehabilitation, reintegration, accountability, and reduced reliance on custody, relying on formal and informal diversion and being on probation if charged. In 2003, the Youth Criminal Justice Act was implemented, which helped with a 70% decline in youth crime rates in the past 2 decades. However, recent national data shows there has been increases in youth crime in the past 5 years. And I'm sure we've also been seeing that on the news and everything currently going on. So while the Youth Criminal Justice Act framework has contributed to long-term reductions, youth outcomes are influenced by the mental health access, poverty, housing instability, and systemic inequities, as well as the fear and mistrust they have. So kind of focusing more on Indigenous and Black youth and racialized youth, Indigenous youth remain significantly overrepresented in the custody compared to the representation in the general youth population, And as seen recently outlined in various documentaries, and such as the CPC Bip the State documentary, Black youth are disproportionately missing due to the heightened levels of drug and human trafficking, resulting in youth as young as 12 being charged for various trafficking charges. Youth are often finding their sense of safety within other individuals that are very much in conflict with the law as well, and turn out to go out of town to go drug and fall into drug schemes and all that kind of stuff, and then get in trouble with the law because they found their sense of security with these individuals. As we know, this highlights the systemic factors present rather than a higher propensity for crime. This includes the over-policing in school and neighborhoods, the school to prison pipeline, and the lack of resources found in our neighborhoods today. And as we know, the lack of equity-centered practices are overlooked in all aspects of the criminal justice system. Okay. So now we're going to basically talk about the youth criminal justice system, and basically talk about the overview of the process and reinforcing that youth-centered approach to kind of understand why where youth disengage and where youth feel the most fear when they are in conflict with the law, and how it all kind of happens. As professionals and adults, this seems simple, right? But from a youth, this often feels fast, unclear, and intimidating. Imagine being a 15-year-old youth and hearing legal terminology you've never encountered before. At what stage do you think youth often disengage the most in the 5 stages that we see on the screen? You can put them in the comments, unmute.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I apologize.
No worries. At what stage do you think youth often most disengage when they're going through the criminal justice system?
Also, just jumping in, Shevani, we have a few respondents in the chat.
From the beginning, stage 1, number 1. Okay. Believe it or not, it is at stage 2, charges and diversion. And that is basically where even though they've interacted with the police first, got in trouble, in stage 2, they're either released to the surety of their parents, or have to speak to an EJM coordinator to figure out what will be the next steps. At the first stage, which we will be talking about in a second, they just kind of commit the crime and then they get in trouble, and they don't really think about what's truly happening, but it's still like they're still engaged trying to figure it out because their parents are still involved, as they have to be released under with their to be surety. So going back to where they disengage, this is basically where the first point of the justice system becomes real, formal, and overwhelming. So for many young people, especially those already navigating the systemic barriers, this moment can feel confusing, intimidating, or hopeless. This reinforces the barriers youth face when interacting with the justice system. So this goes back to the fear and mistrust of authority. So if they've already had a negative interaction with the police, getting charged and going through a diversion program heightens that fear. So that as a result, they kind of disengage and are just basically living in fear, not really knowing what's going to happen, because at this point, do they get a lawyer? What are they supposed to do? There's really no one there to show them what they're supposed to do. So we're going to start with talking about police interactions. With the youth that you work with or the youth that you know, do you think they all know their rights as a youth here in Ontario or in Canada? Yeah. A lot of the time, youth actually don't know what their rights are as youth. They're very similar to the rights that we have as adults. However, they're more protected under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. And And us understanding their police interactions is very important because that shapes what their entire experience is going to be. So if they were disproportionately stopped, over policed, or yeah, exactly. It also depends on how good their lawyers are when they get to that stage as well, right? And half the time, they don't even know what's going on in courts because they're not even their lawyers go for them. But coming back to police interactions, the first contact of police often shapes a young person's entire experience. So if they have a negative experience, they're going to see the whole process as a negative experience. So that's where they don't really know what to do. They're just going to be angry all the time and not really fully understand what's going on or even want to understand what's going on because it was already a negative experience from the beginning. So the interaction folds can influence the diversion access, core outcomes, and long-term engagement. So as youth, they have the right to know why they were detained, have the right to remain silent, speak to a lawyer, and have a parent or guardian notified. If they are arrested, they need to have a parent or guardian notified as soon as possible, as they will have to be released to their parents. And then from there, they will be charged or have to go through a diversion process with the EJM coordinator, extrajudicial measures coordinator, which is a pre-charge program. And however, knowing these rights and understanding how to use them are very different things because youth do not fully understand the difference between either being detained, being arrested, terms like detention, undertaking, extrajudicial measures, or even the right to counsel may be completely unfamiliar. Even when rights are read out loud, they fully don't understand what is happening, and the comprehension is not guaranteed from these youth. Youth often answer questions out of fear of appearing guilty. Silence feels risky. So many youth believe cooperating means answering everything. And that's kind of where they fall through the cracks and get even more charges, even if they weren't fully involved in that crime or in that incident per se, because they felt like they had to speak because they don't know what their rights are. However, we as professionals and we as people can change or prepare youth before these crisis moments per se. We can normalize statements like, I would like to speak to a lawyer before answering questions, and am I free to leave? When youth understand their rights before crisis, they respond differently during the crisis. So adolescents, for example, and youth, they process things very differently than adults. And they're more likely to comply with authority figures because that's a person in uniform. So when they see a person in uniform, they think they need to answer all their questions and need to understand and need to say what they think the police need to say, but they're not going to fully say what they've experienced or what they've gone through. And this means however, so this explains or shows the importance of talking and importance of explaining the rights as youth because they often struggle with that legal language and need to be able to understand that legal jargon. So the next stage is charges and diversion. This is where the most critical decision point is, and this is where youth often disengage within the justice system. So after the police interaction, a youth may be formally charged, which moves them into the court system, or the police may choose to use EJM, extrajudicial measures, or what we commonly refer to as diversion. However, diversion is an EJM charge is often determined by the police officer, and from there, they would refer that to an EJM coordinator. So then they would be referred to the youth justice centers or working with individuals like us. From there, this decision can either alter a young person's trajectory as it's based on the discretion of the police. So what factors do you think influence whether a youth receives diversion?
Sorry, is it okay if we speak up?
Yeah, that's totally okay.
Sorry. In my experience, it depends on the police officers. Some of them aren't aware of programs. There's some that I find are more empathetic. So yeah, that's some of the concerns and stuff that I've worked with before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oftentimes, especially newer police officers, they are unaware of what diversion programs are, and youth often are not offered that opportunity to repair the harm that they caused either another individual, the community, or anything like that. They are not, and then they go straight to getting a charge. This oftentimes the police overlook a lot of factors and there's no equity-based practices involved with diversion programs. So for example, if a youth is seen as has mental health concerns as well as lives in a high crime neighborhood, they're less likely to get a diversion program like this and are more likely to get charged. And that also results in their negative interactions with the police. So if they start screaming at the police officer or doing or saying things that they should not have said or anything like that because they're unsure of what's happening, they're less likely to get diversion because it's the police's job to refer that to a coordinator. So this goes back to the severity of the offense as well, as someone mentioned, the youth's attitude towards the police, towards the situation, the support the youth has, and the victim input and public safety concerns. But we also know that diversion, like I said, is not always equitable. Research shows disparities in who receive diversion and who proceeds deeper into the system. Oftentimes, youth that have been charged and do not receive diversion and go through the process are more likely to go through a revolving door within the criminal justice system. So from a youth's perspective, they do not understand that diversion is even an option. And as someone mentioned in the comments, parents don't even know. And these are a lot of barriers that families have to face because they are unsure of these processes and unsure of their rights. This goes back to not enough education being found to explain what their rights are and how to navigate a system like this. This goes back to them being unaware of the diversion pathways. They may feel hopeless, assume the worst, disengage very early, this is why they disengage right in this step, and don't advocate for themselves because they don't know how to. And that's where we as professionals and we as adults come in to show them that this is where you advocate for yourself. This is where you need to receive that support because they don't know how to. Going to step 3, which is court and diversion. There are 2 pathways in this process. One is the court process, which is once a charge is laid, they typically move forward to either a court process or EJS, which is another diversion program. To talk about the court process, this is where they go to court and all their legal responses will be found under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. This is where they would potentially need lawyers because at this point they would have to figure out, do they need legal aid and how to apply for legal aid? How do you get a certificate, duty counsel, or getting a private counsel? And at that point, that process takes longer, resulting in youth struggling to figure out what the next steps are or not knowing. But once they get a lawyer, youth often do not even go to their court dates unless they're required to. So youth do not know what's going on within their court sessions and are unsure what is unsure of what to do next. So we're going to kind of focus on EJS here, which is another diversion program. This process is they got charged, they had their fingerprints and their mugshots taken, and from there they go to court and they get offered an opportunity to move this out of court and use a restorative process, a community-based program where youth are able to repair the harm they caused, understand the severity of their actions, and understand what they can do to be, I guess, a more productive member in society. So going to the court process, they appear before a judge, meet with duty counsel or a defense lawyer, and have to apply for legal aid, which is determined by their parent or guardian's finances. So not everyone can get approved for legal aid, which causes more barriers because they need to know about tax bracket the parents fall into and all that kind of stuff. And some parents don't even, some youth aren't even living with their parent or guardians, as some of them can be in foster care. And if they go through the court process, They may have multiple court dates, receive a sentence, and if found guilty, they would either get a sentence or have probation or something like that. And for many youth, court is intimidating. The environment is very formal. However, court nowadays is mostly virtual through Zoom. The language is very legalistic. There's too much jargon that they don't understand, and the process can often feel slow and confusing. Youth often report not fully understanding what is happening. When we did our interviews during LawLantis, a lot of the time youth did not understand what was happening. And they were asked a lot of questions about taking responsibility, and they just said yes because that felt the easiest way to do it. But we tend to forget that during this time, their brains are still developing. They're still feeling really stressed, and their fight or flight instincts are still intact, like still kicking in. They're still in that crisis. So whatever they're doing at this point is just reacting, and they're not fully comprehending what is going on. And then talking about EJS, that's going to a form of diversion used after a charge has been laid, but a matter proceeds fully through court. So under the YJCA, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, EJS allows youth to take responsibility for their actions in a structured, community-based way without continuing deeper into the court process. If the EJS simply requires completion of tasks without addressing underlying needs, we risk setting the youth up for failure. So if they only get community service and don't get therapeutic programming, full wraparound support for employment, helping them with anything that they may need, mental health concerns, recognizing the people they surround themselves with, peer influences, how they manage their problems, conflicts, they often go through the revolving door again and don't fully understand the severity of their actions, resulting in them falling deeper into the cracks. And a lot of the time, EJS provides that mental health support, provides those educational connections with the court liaison officer, gives them that employment readiness, and it's all very culturally responsive to their needs, their goals. And EJS is really important because we see better outcomes as accountability and rehabilitation is promoted. They require youth to acknowledge the harm that's been caused, and they require active participation. And this goes through community-based programming. How do you think we can ensure accountability is paired with support?
I would say working with agencies or things that fit the needs of the youth while they're going through this process, and to explain things to them and let them know exactly what accountability is, and giving them all the support that they do need.
Yeah. Anything else? Going kind of just talking about a little bit more about EJS and diversion programs. Oftentimes this provides that youth the ongoing wraparound support that they need, that they don't typically get from schools or any other support system they may have, because they're allowed to get their volunteer hours once they're done. They're allowed to understand what they want to do, figure out their goals, and kind of understand everything from a newer perspective, because it's more focused on their goals, their wants, and their needs, and not focused on everyone else's wants, needs, and what they want to get out of, and what they want their kid to potentially get out of this program. So we're going to head to the last part of the 5 steps, which is going to be sentencing and reintegration. This is the most crucial step once the youth is navigating the system. So we're going to start with sentencing. Kind of going back to the youth-centered approach. We need to focus on accountability. We need to understand there's still going to be ongoing fear and mistrust. There's still going to be mental health. There's still going to be mental health issues that youth often face. And we need to understand that accountability must be meaningful. They need to recognize the harm that's been caused. They need to take responsibility for it and understand that what they're doing. Because if they don't understand, they're just going to go through the process again and again and again until they figure it out, or they age out of the system, unfortunately. Because let's not forget, a youth can be charged as an adult at earliest as the age of 14. And these consequences, when a youth commits a crime, must be proportionate. However, we don't really see that, because when a youth is found to be involved in the criminal justice system over and over again, they're more likely to get a more serious sentence compared to a youth that's committed the same crime. Or a Black youth will get a disproportionate sentence compared to, unfortunately, their white counterpart. Same with Indigenous youth as well. That's where we see the disproportionate sentencing, and the very sad reality of the justice system. And oftentimes these youth then will be like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. Let me go. And then we'll find people more involved in the justice system just as much as they are, and end up going out of town to go do and being trafficked, because that's where they find their sense of safety, because they don't know anything else other than committing crime or being around negative peer influence. And going back to sentencing, the response must also address their underlying circumstances. So when judges or anyone is sentencing these youth, they also need to understand what the youth is going through, understanding their mental health concerns, their what their situation can be at home, their poverty, housing instability, their education levels, and all that kind of stuff. So and the law recognizes that young people are still developing cognitively, emotionally, and socially, and their decision-making capacity is not the same as adults. And the justice system minimally reflects that. However, they still get charged at disproportionate rates. From a youth's perspective, sentencing can also be very overwhelming. They also still hear legal jargon and don't understand what's happening. They probably don't understand what these conditions even mean, how long they last, what happens if they breach this and get a failure to comply order, and how a youth record works. A lot of time youth don't know that once they complete their diversion program, or once they hit 18, they can apply to get their fingerprints and their mugshots destroyed with Toronto Police or the RCMP, depending on what police agency they were got charged with. So these are things that youth often do not know and should be informed once they're done their programs with youth justice centers, or when they're done with their probation officers. And many youth not in court, but leave confused or don't even attend themselves, and their lawyers attend, providing them little to no information. This confusion increases their risk of breach, or in other words, a failure to comply order. And this can result in them having more charges because they failed to follow their probation order or the process they have to follow, just to make sure that they're not getting in trouble again. And this is why we need to focus on a youth-centered lens, because if the youth is placed on probation with conditions, they also need to understand, it should also include if they're attending school regularly, if they have to follow a curfew, attend counseling, avoiding certain peers. These are things that are also mentioned in their conditions and should be fully looked into to make sure they can attend school in a safe manner and not risk getting another charge because of the negative peer influences that may be in the schools. We must ask, does the youth have transportation to the counseling? So if these are the conditions, are there any barriers preventing them from meeting those conditions? Is their housing stable enough to maintain a curfew? Are they being supported in school? Are their mental health needs being addressed? This ensures that there's accountability. And if there is no accountability with support, this increases the risk of breaching their conditions. And if we move into discussing, and as we move into discussing reintegration and prevention, remember, sentencing is not the end of the process. It's either the beginning of a beginning of growth, or the beginning of being deeper ingrained into the system and falling into that revolving door. So this is essentially the last part of the 5-step process, which is reintegration. So what comes next? If they're involved in the criminal justice system, youth often struggle with not going back to school because they either could be suspended and have to go to a new school, but there's transportation barriers. If they're 16, 17, they may face employment barriers. And as we know, getting a job is very hard in this economy right now, as well as for youth more specifically. And there's that stigma. Youth that commit crime are seen as criminals, are seen as bad kids. And that's where we as adults and professionals need to show them that they're not criminals, they're not a label, they're more than just that. Because if they keep hearing these things, they're often gonna start believing it themselves and go down that negative path. When youth that are in custody or leave court, they either can return to school, home, community, their peers, but none of that goes. But their return doesn't go unchanged. They carry that stigma, the anxiety. They carry new restrictions and that shame that they're seen as bad people. And oftentimes, these youth, when they're going through this process, they also can be suspended, be expelled, also be missing a lot of credits, and have to go to alternative schools to get these credits. But there are a lot of requirements they have to meet to go to these alternative schools. And if education is not quickly stabilized right after they start slowly reintegrating, there will be a long-term outcomes decline. They will not go back to school. They will find something else to do, or just go into staying down this path and not really fully understanding the severity of their actions, or not fully meeting their goals or what they want to do when they finish high school. Even though youth records are protected and time limited under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, youth often believe their future is permanently damaged. This belief alone can decrease a lot of motivation. So clear education about record timelines and opportunities are very essential with youth justice involved youth, as it can intensify existing mental health challenges. Youth that think they don't have a life outside of this can result in youth not wanting to become the best version of themselves and taking those big steps that can often be scary. Reintegration also must include, like I said, mental health support, but we also know there are long wait times to provide the youth the support they need immediately with counseling or subsidized support. If housing is unstable, compliance becomes difficult with curfew conditions, reporting requirements, and school attendance all becomes harder. So this is why we kind of go back to that youth-centered approach and need to recognize that these are factors that youth often may not be able to fully recognize, because if their housing is if they are living in a poverty neighborhood or living in a low economic household, how are they supposed to meet their curfew conditions? How are they supposed to go to school if there's a lot of instability at home? So these are conditions and things that we need to look into when youth are navigating the system. And research shows that community-based support and positive connections reduce reoffending more effectively than punitive responses alone. This prevents that revolving door that I've been discussing. And reintegration is where long-term prevention happens. If youth feel supported, understood, and capable, the outcomes improve. If youth feel stigmatized and isolated, the risk increases. Reintegration is not about compliance, it's also about identity. Do youth see themselves as someone who's made a mistake, or someone who's permanently labeled? That's where our role as adults and working professionals come in, because we have to reinforce their growth, not their labels. And a question again, where do youth often fall through the cracks after sentencing? Or where do you think youth struggle the most with reintegrating back into the community? Okay, we will move on to reflection, the final slide. Exactly, yeah, the underlying issues. And that's where it's really important to understand the support, to make sure they have that support, even if it's not their family, they have that support outside of their family, because it takes a village. Supporting one person takes a village, and they should be able to have that outside of their family as well. Okay, so we're going to be going to the reflection question. If reintegration is the most vulnerable stage, are we investing enough in prevention before youth reach this point?
In my opinion, no. Once a youth has contact with the police, or obviously just getting in trouble at school, we're already in reactive mode. In my opinion, in terms of preventative stuff, I mean, there are programs and stuff like that. I don't think there's enough. But also, do youth even know how to access those things? Do their parents, if the parents are involved, are they able to access things? And then also, again, in my opinion, for racialized youth, or youth with that are struggling, the school to prison pipeline, what is being done to support kids who are considered troubled, I guess you could say.
Exactly, right. So like in schools, for example, as well, if two youth, one being Black and one being their white counterpart, are doing the same thing in school, the Black youth is more likely to get in trouble and more likely to get suspended compared to their white counterpart, who is often going to be either just given off with a warning and not have called home. So these Black youth or racialized youth are seen more as troubled and not able to fully understand why they're going through this and why they're being disproportionately penalized at a significant rate. Okay.
May I say something about support for reintegration in Ontario for youth?
Yes.
The Ontario Justice Education Network, OJEN, that is supported by the Law Foundation of Ontario, there is a program where they go into the custody facilities all over Ontario, and the youth have opportunity to ask questions and also to learn about the law and what to do when they're released. And I find, maybe because I'm a part of that program, it is so very helpful because some young person does not have a family to go back to. So they don't realize they need to make positive connections before they leave there, and that can be done while they're there. Some youth do not even know that they require a health card. They're on medications while they're incarcerated. They go off medication maybe for mental health reasons, so their behavior declines when they're back in the community unless that connection is made that the day they're on the outside, they can be in touch with a doctor. And that's where a lot of things are falling through the cracks. So I just honor what the OJEN is doing, and it's being measured now to see that it is really very helpful, because you'll hear the incarcerated youth saying, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. And one of the last things I want to mention, which today's education may have been too short to talk about, is the support that parents need, because a lot of parents do not understand the system at all. And a lot of parents, I'm finding from my youth advocacy work, is that they need help also with their mental health. They cannot even support their young people. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you're definitely right. There's a lot of, and that's why there's the implementation of the youth justice systems, the youth justice centers now. However, there's not enough support found in the youth justice centers, as there's no wraparound support and there's no consistency between all the professionals working with that one youth, which is stopping youth from getting that support they need. When they're in that negative environment, they don't think they can get that the positive support, and think they're just here, let me just do what I need to do and just get out. They don't actually think they have to build those connections and get that positive support they need. Any other questions? Anything anyone learned?
Right. Well, we're coming close to the end of our session. We are going to leave the floor open, maybe for a few minutes to see if there's one or two questions we can take from our group here today. So feel free to come off mute or drop your question in the chat.
May I make another comment?
Yeah.
We must be careful around saying that the youth record can be destroyed in the fingerprints. They're actually destroyed on the surface. But behind the scenes, if the youth gets into the same type of trouble when he or she turns 18, it's all lined up again. So one of the things to emphasize with our young people is continue on the good path you're on so that you go through and become the best that you can. You do not want a repeat of what happened. And as you learn, we are here to support you to move forward. Yeah, because a lot of the youth, and I just want to plug a bit on a new book I wrote called Uncaged, Uncaged. A lot of our youths are traumatized when they are in custody. And if they get out and they don't have trauma healing, that's another thing that is very destructive and disruptive for them. They go down the wrong path because their trauma is so worse than before they went in.
100%. Absolutely.
A great session, a great learning for all of us today. And it's been very helpful as a great reminder for folks out there who see youth going in the wrong direction when they have been sentenced and they're saying, well, haven't you learned your lesson? You should not be going that way. But their brains continue to grow and they need a lot of our support.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing those comments, Norma. As you were speaking, one thing that came to mind for me was the lack of public knowledge on how real the revolving door of crime actually is. You mentioned youth enduring trauma and how that can increase as they are released into the community. And also mentioned the fact that their brains are still developing. They don't have that cognitive capacity to truly understand some of the barriers and challenges that come with having that criminal background and record. And so definitely I see education being critical for young people, as well as support, and not only support for them, but also their families as they continue to work through their challenges. Right.
Sorry, I think one thing that, especially with what Norma said, I think it was Norma, sorry if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Is, we don't even talk about like with youth when they're sent to secure custody and some of the trauma of them being on lockdown, strip searches, those things were perpetuating more harm. And those things are also not addressed when they do come home. And that's, in my opinion, not something that you get over. Adults don't. So for children, I think that's another area that needs to be focused on as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, Norma, if you need some help,
Yes.
I am here to support. And I tell you, LawLantis, you keep doing what you're doing. And is it Shevani? And I know for sure that this will continue. We need to educate and support parents. We need to support our children to be strong Black youth so that they do not end up in this pathway. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for the comments, everyone, and for your time for today. We really do appreciate you coming, learning with us as well. And special thank you to Shevani as well for the hard work and preparation that went into today's presentation. In the interest of time, I do see we have about 5 minutes left, and we do have a few announcements to share with everyone. So we do want to take a bit of time to talk about our LawLantis project. So LawLantis is an initiative that the team at Revitaled has been working on over the past year or so. And it is an interactive research-based youth justice education online game that is designed to help youth get a better understanding of how Ontario's youth justice legal system actually works. And Shevani shared a few statistics with us today, but I also just want to add on top of that that Black and Indigenous youth remain overrepresented within our criminal justice system. And traditional legal education, while it is very helpful, can be overwhelming at some time. And then research that we've done going into this project shows that gamified learning can help to increase engagement and knowledge retention by up to 40%. So to ensure that this game was community built and research based, we completed over 50 hours of interviews with lawyers, youth, and people who work with youth to get a better understanding of some of the areas where youth justice education lacks, as well as areas or themes that they would like to see integrated into this game. And so all the themes that we gathered from the interview guided workshops, like the one that Shevani led today, as well as the other workshop that we'll be hosting in our Lunch and Learn mini-series. And most importantly, the information that we gathered from these interviews directly influenced the game's story, structure, and design. So LawLantis, the game, follows the story of Seamus, a 15-year-old Afro-Indigenous teen who's rebuilding his life after years of instability in the child welfare system. And when he reconnects with some old friends, he gets into a bit of hot water, and a dare turns into a shoplifting charge. And so players get the chance to play as Seamus in this game. They step into his shoes and they navigate themes such as racial bias, justice system processes, court processes, and how they work, and also tries to work to rebuild and repair his relationship with his caregiver, Mona. And so through the gameplay, youth learn more about their rights, understand Youth Criminal Justice Act and legal processes, and learn a bit more about decision-making skills and advocacy skills as well. Next slide, please. So we're celebrating the launch of LawLantis, keeping it community themed and community centered as much as possible. And we'll be hosting a community event to celebrate the launch of this game. So the event is centered around youth justice and community building. We want to keep it at the intersection of education, innovation, and advocacy as much as possible. We don't only want to commemorate, the launch of this game, but we also want to create it to be somewhat of an innovative think tank where we can learn from one another and be challenged to implement solutions to improve community safety and well-being for youth and the community at large. So this event is designed for youth, families, educators, and community leaders such as yourself. And on site, guests will have the chance to try LawLantis firsthand. We'll also have conversations led by registered social worker and keynote speaker Brianna Phillip. She will be delivering a youth-centered presentation on building youth legal literacy and youth empowerment. And we'll also have a spoken word performance by award-winning artist Elle de Leon, who will challenge us to think about resilience and what that looks like for our youth today. We'll also engage in collaborative justice building activities that ask questions surrounding what does justice look like today and what can we do as a community to achieve it together. So be also other opportunities to engage as well. Lunch will be served, and Uber vouchers are available as well for youth who will be attending without caregivers or parents, so to ensure that they do have the ability to engage in this event. So registration, it is still open until tomorrow, so please be sure to scan the QR code. We'll also drop the link for the launch event in the chat as well, in case you were able to attend and engage in this day with us. The launch event will be held on March 17th. Doors will open at 10:30 and it will be held at Audley Recreation Center. Next slide, please. We do have our final workshop in this LawLantis mini-series led by myself. So hopefully you do have the opportunity to come back in a couple weeks on February 26th from 12 to 1 to learn a little bit more about how intersections can shape youth pathways and prevention. So this session will center around how youth justice involvement can be influenced by multiple intersecting factors, such as housing, education, and health. And we'll be able to go through a mock exercise together to explore how these sectors intersect, as well as potential solutions that we can do or implement as community leaders to support marginalized, justice-involved youth. The session will be online, same platform, Microsoft Teams, and it's perfect for youth workers, educators, and anyone interested in youth justice and crime prevention. So I will also share the link for that in the chat, as well as the link for our mailing list. Next slide, please. All right. And we do appreciate you for joining us today. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments. Again, this workshop will be shared at a later date. And we do hope that you have the chance to check it out and share with your colleagues. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. We do appreciate you being here today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. So take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.